How often do you hear about an old warhorse making this, triumphant return, especially one that was supposed to be retired, decades ago? But that's exactly what seems to be happening with the F-15EX. And today, in this deep dive, we're going to try and unpack exactly why.
Yeah, that's the mission, really. We'll be digging into, budget proposals, industry reports, military thinking, trying to understand the strategy behind the U.S. Air Force doubling down on this fighter, and importantly, what it actually means for air power today.
Right. And we're basing this on some solid sources. The Fiscal Year 2026 budget proposal, stuff coming out of Boeing recently, and comments from senior Air Force officers. The goal here is really to pull out the key insights for you about this, pretty surprising comeback. So let's jump right into the numbers, because honestly, they tell quite a story. The U.S. Air Force is planning a significant increase in F-15EX procurements. They're jumping from an intended fleet size of 98 up to 129 aircraft. And that's laid out pretty clearly in the Fiscal Year 2026 budget proposal, which, by the way, also sets aside a cool $3 billion just for the F-15EX.
And it's fascinating, like you said, to see where that fits, because at the same time, we're seeing things like F-35A procurements being halved, and also a surge in funding for that next-gen fighter, the F-47 program.
Right.
Now, there have been some supply chain hiccups delaying the F-15EX a bit, sure, but Boeing seems to be ramping up production now. They're aiming for, I think, a steady rate of 2 jets per month by the end of 2026.
And talking about unexpected timing, this budget news dropped less than 2 months after President Trump announced that the Michigan Air National Guard's A-10s, those ground attack jets, would be replaced by F-15s. What did that A-10 replacement signal to you? Does it say something bigger about the F-15?
Oh, absolutely. That was quite telling. It really highlighted the F-15's versatility, It's a heavier aircraft, longer range compared to the A-10, which is much more specialized. So it kind of hinted early on that the Air Force wasn't just thinking like-for-like replacement for old F-15s, but potentially broader roles, different strategic thinking.
Okay, so to really get this resurgence, we need a bit of history, right? Because it seems, weird. The Air Force planned to stop buying F-15s back in 2001, and the air superiority ones even earlier, like 1986. So what changed? What brought this, Cold War jet back?
Well, a big piece of the puzzle is actually the F-22 Raptor program. The F-22, the 5th-gen fighter, it failed to deliver a successor to the F-15 on the scale they originally planned. Big time. Cost overruns, production cuts.
Right. They ended up with way fewer than intended.
Exactly. And that created this capability gap. Slowly, gradually, interest started building again in, okay, what if we enhance the F-15? And that ultimately led, kind of remarkably, to these first new orders for the F-15EX after decades. It wasn't just sentimentality, it was pure pragmatism filling a need.
So it's like the opposite of the usual tech cycle, isn't it? Instead of just chasing the newest thing, they're actually going back and saying, hey, this old design with upgrades still has serious legs.
It does, yeah. You could almost think of it like taking an old battleship hull and loading it with cutting-edge missiles and sensors. It's not just about the age of the frame. And besides that long-term view, there's an immediate need, too. The F-15EX is, frankly, vital right now for phasing out the really old F-15C and D models, and maybe even starting to replace some of the older F-15E Strike Eagles that have been flying for decades.
Okay, but let's tackle the elephant in the room. People hear F-15 and they think, 70s tech. Lieutenant General Michael Lowe even mentioned this back in 2022. He said, some people are still looking at this as a 1970s technology aircraft, but then you have senior officers calling it truly cutting edge. How do those two things square? Is it just good marketing, or is this thing genuinely transformed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And no, it's definitely not just spin. This isn't your grandpa's F-15 with a new coat of paint. The F-15EX has some fundamental upgrades. Key among them is its open mission system architecture.
Okay, what does that mean in simple terms?
Think of it like, its brain is modular. You can easily plug in new software, new hardware, new sensors. As technology evolves, it's built for continuous upgrades, much more adaptable. Then you add in a really advanced electronic warfare suite for jamming, confusing enemy radar, protecting itself.
So the bones might be older, but the insides, the electronics, the software, that's all state of the art.
Precisely. And then there's the radar, the ANMETG-82. This thing is a beast. It's roughly twice the size of the radars on the F-16s, the workhorse for many NATO air forces. And it's about a third larger than the radar on the F-35, the NAPG-81. Size matters for radar power and range.
Wow. Okay, so that radar size, plus the open systems, the EW suite, that puts the F-15EX in a, pretty unique spot, doesn't it? From what we're seeing, it's basically the only Western fighter currently in production that's in the same heavyweight class as the big Russian and Chinese jets, like the Su-30, Su-57, J-16, J-20. So it's a combination of endurance, how many weapons it can carry, and that big radar.
Okay.
It's kind of unmatched in the West right now.
That's a fair assessment, yeah. It occupies a unique niche, and connecting that to the bigger strategy, its importance goes way beyond just replacing old planes. It brings significant advantages compared to other Western fighters that are in production, especially in situational awareness, range, raw flight performance, and, crucially, payload, weapons carrying capacity.
And you can immediately see how those advantages become critical when you think about, say, the Pacific Theater. Huge distances, long flight times.
Exactly. That range and payload are vital over those vast stretches of ocean.
So what about the planes that were supposed to replace it?
Right. Well, both the F-35 and especially the F-22 ended up with much shorter operational ranges than originally planned. Design compromises, cost issues. And while the new heavy fighter, the F-47, looks promising on paper, long-range, advanced tech, it's probably years away from service, likely facing its own delays. And the projected cost is enormous, maybe 4 times as much as an F-35 or an F-15EX per plane.
Okay, but just playing devil's advocate here, the budget did have F-35A buys, as you mentioned. Is there a risk here? Are we potentially underfunding the truly 5th-gen stealthy stuff by investing so much in this, albeit heavily upgraded 4th-gen design? Where's the balance?
That's the tightrope the Air Force is walking, absolutely. It's a valid concern about balancing current needs with future tech. But the reality seems to be that the F-15EX fills an immediate, critical gap for a long-range, heavy payload fighter that simply won't be filled otherwise for potentially a decade or more. The F-35 isn't designed for that extreme range mission in the same way, and the F-47 just isn't ready. So the F-15EX becomes the only option available for that specific role in the near to midterm.
So it's a bridge, but a very capable bridge. Right. Maybe more than just a bridge.
I think so. Even when or if the F-47 enters service down the line, the F-15EX is likely to remain much more cost-effective for certain missions. Think long-range missile strikes against less defended targets, maybe anti-drone patrols over large areas, or air combat against older adversary aircraft. Its lower operating cost and versatility mean it probably retains significant value long after the F-47 arrives. It's not just a stopgap.
It really is a fascinating story, isn't it? The F-15 going from being put out to pasture to becoming this strategic cornerstone again. It just shows how modernization, changing needs, it can breathe new life into platforms you thought were done. Sometimes the tried and true updated is the right answer.
Absolutely. And it leaves you with a thought, doesn't it? In this world where we're always chasing the absolute newest technology, what other, maybe older platforms are out there that with the right upgrades and adaptability might hold some unexpected strategic value that we're maybe overlooking right now? Something for you to think about.